So just by way of introduction of Rita, you've heard that she is currently a member of the Mason City Council, has been so since 2016. She comes from a family of people who have been involved in politics. Her great-grandfather was a mayor in Wisconsin, also a successful businessman at the same time. And Rita's sort of following that similar track where not only is she involved in politics, she's involved in a whole bunch of other community things, such as she's involved in the executive committee of the Ingham County Democratic Party. She's with the NAACP Lansing Economic Development Committee. She's a part of the Michigan Democratic Party Disability Caucus. She's a part of the Black Caucus of local elected officials. And, not that that's not enough, and she's also the owner of the Creative Collective here in Mason, Michigan as well. So thank you so much, Rita, for taking time in your very, very busy schedule to have a conversation with us.
Thank you for that gracious introduction.
You're very welcome. So I have a list of questions, but this will be more of a conversation as much as possible. So, but to start us off with, I'm just wondering if you can talk with us a bit about when you first started thinking about proposing a Malcolm X Day of Observation as a council member, and what your motivation was for the purpose, and why you thought it would be important for the community of Mason to sort of recognize and honor Malcolm in that way.
First, growing up, I loved comics, and so this is very X-Men with Professor X and Magneto. So I grew up seeing that, you know, they were both fighting for the rights of mutants, but they just had different approaches. So I've always been a fan of Malcolm X, just because I thought his method was most necessary in a society that doesn't understand or want to understand his perspective. Second, back in high school, 1992, I was class president at the beginning of our senior year, and Spike Lee from Hollywood sent his producer to town to scout for the Malcolm X movie. On the day he was coming, I was the principal's assistant first hour, and the day he was coming was legit scheduled for Senior Slave Day. Or no, yeah, it was my junior year, right, because, yeah, it was horrible. And I was just like, what are we doing? So I let them know. I'm like, do you realize, like, this event is happening? What this event is, it was a fundraiser for, I think, like, our football team, or, and so underclassmen get to rent a senior out and make them do whatever, whether that's, you know, dress like transgender, which was hilarious back then, or, you know, carry my books to class, whatever. And so we changed that quick to rent a senior day, but I thought, you know, that might be an interesting story of where I'm coming from and this journey. Lastly, since getting on council, people know I'm consistent, I'm responsive, I'm effective, and it wasn't till about 2018 where minority members in our community started reaching out and sharing their stories and asking for representation, because they had already seen in my 2 years how active and involved I am, and that it was genuine. So, and then that made me open an open mic, because no one was discussing our addiction issues or our mental health crises. You know, like, we had so many kids from a graduating class. So I had to form the Creative Collective to allow constituents a place where they can even gather, share their shared experience, encourage and empower each other, meanwhile trying to use my seat to really do the policy work that echoes an inclusive, welcoming community that talks, you know. So, in short, I could also bring up John Taylor, right? So community members brought up John Taylor, for those of you who don't know. He is the only documented out of Mason lynching that happened in 1866. Mason was founded in 1865. So the year after is when this lynching happened. where he was dragged out of jail. And Delhi, just recently in the last 2 years, finally gave him a memorial park. So Mason has plenty of reason and plenty of people who are ready for this and have asked for it.
Absolutely. Wow, what a great story about the fact that when Spike Lee was coming to the school,
Yeah.
there was actually going to be a senior slave day, right? It sort of really speaks to how.
Yeah, like, hey,
how-
we should look at ourselves. This
Right.
is an opportunity. We've had many
I mean, it also
since
sort of
30 years ago.
yeah, it also speaks to like how normalized white supremacy is, right? It's like people don't even question those kinds of things. Like it should be obvious, I think, to most people, but apparently it's not. So.
Yeah.
Well, a second question would be then, so when you submitted this proposal for a Malcolm X Day of Observation back in February, a proposal that was voted down, what were some of the responses you got back from other council members during that vote discussion? And what did it tell you about the political climate in Mason, Michigan?
Great question, because it really highlights our challenges with democracy. And there were 0 responses from council members. There was 0 discussion. In fact, how council works is I put something on an agenda, we go to the meeting, I make a motion to discuss it basically, but I need a second vote to allow that discussion to happen. Oftentimes, what I have found in trying to represent the underrepresented, no one will second my initiative so that there is no discussion, and that almost happened on this one. So I was lucky that it even got a second, so that there could be discussion. Unfortunately, it was just me talking, so that's the big issue. And so it's oppressing where even community members, if they come to council, they can't even hear what I'm thinking about. They can't understand where the genesis was. Like, we were doing so much to suppress information in an open forum.
Wow.
Zero response.
Incredible. So nobody verbalized any reason why they voted against it.
No. Like, you ask the political climate, I would say chilly with a cold front.
Yeah. So, in addition to how the council members did not respond, what kind of response was there from the larger community? First, maybe from the residents of Mason once they found out about the proposal, and then secondly, just from the broader community, even outside of Mason. What kind of response have you heard, either pro or against, from the larger community?
The support has been amazing to people who get it, The challenge is, they've been telling us for a while, community members by data have been showing us that they are becoming more progressive. Whether that was voting for marijuana in 2018, which Mason City of Voters voted a higher percent than the state level for wanting something. Reproductive rights. Our voting demographic, like only 13% of Mason residents are 65 and older. Like, Mason is young, but they are not even being heard or represented by the body. The reaction from community members that aren't supportive, Mason has been ambivalent or bigoted. State legislators, county commissioners, Sarah Anthony, our senator, they have been supportive and encouraging me. That's been helpful. I think the huge turnoff on why people are paying attention now is because Mason gives so many observation days to so many different things, except this. And typically that process is something on a consent calendar, which means on our city council agenda, we can just vote for a clump of things and not have discussion, and it's just done. That's usually where everybody else's resolutions go, or proclamations. So the fact that I've even had to go this far into this process, I think is what people are now picking up on.
I mean, I had heard that council members were saying that they don't, do commemorative stuff, in general, or for other kinds of things, but
Yeah.
you're saying just the opposite. Can you give us a couple of examples of the kinds of things that they have voted in favor of, in terms of observations?
I don't, I should have probably looked online today and saw what day it is, but, we have days for the bowling team, the wrestling team, football, things that I've been told none of my stuff will pass because it's not, quote, city business. But, come on.
Yeah.
I just can't, I can't go there, yeah. It's so blatant.
Well, and we've also heard that, since the vote was, since the proposal was voted down, that the Mason City Council members have made their own proposals as a way of kind of countering what you initiated back in February. Can you say something about what they have been doing, and what again that also says about the larger political culture in Mason?
They proposed an ordinance to prevent elected and appointed officials from speaking their mind on anything. So the political culture in Mason says if we don't like the rules, we're gonna change them, and that's been this journey. I didn't set out in 2016. My goals were keep the community informed, get questions answered, and be a strong conduit from the community to City Hall. Because that was my experience as a resident, was I had no idea what was going on. I didn't understand the system, I didn't understand process. So I get that. Yeah, they'd rather just shut it down. They changed what's the term? I always say they move the goalpost. Anytime I get closer, in fact, it turned into this racial conversation. This was even for Pride Month, pushback, advocating for longboarders who just want a leisurely, role in our cemetery. It's no, they're hoodlums. The implicit bias votes are just so ridiculous.
Yeah, my understanding is that the vote was 5-1 for that proposal with one member absent, correct?
Oh, the skateboards?
No,
Or-
for the, for basically silencing speech.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Everyone voted for that. I was the no. I researched, I talked with attorneys, ALCU. Also, how would anyone be comfortable with that? If I can't, and how am I supposed to, we're there to check our government, right? If council wasn't there, that means that a city manager can do whatever with the budget, infrastructure. So we are there as checks and balances. So how am I supposed to effectively, productively function in my seat if I cannot be critical and make any progress and change happen? Again, no conversation, no dialogue.
Certainly, in many ways, one could argue that the pushback that you received from your proposal, the responses from other council members with their own proposals to silence speech, is part of a larger nationwide narrative about systems of power and education systems pushing back against a more honest understanding of U.S. history, particularly how deeply rooted the systems of structural racism is in the society. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, why do you think it is important for people to come to terms with this dynamic?
I fully agree with that. I've seen angry moms at board meetings. I've seen parents wanting to block books, ban some books that we didn't even have in our library, P.S. These were just on the poster, recommended. Community members aren't even researching themselves before they come and partake. It's so bizarre. No LGBTQ sex ed, continuous bullying, willful ignorance, I would say. I think community members are afraid. I have a lot of support in my DMs, but they worry about going to church, and their aunts quilting group, and how will this affect their elderly customers? I battle back and forth with, is that good enough anymore? Are we past that, or, at what point are you bothered that BIPOC community members are reading these comments when it's distraction and they're making it about me, when this is really about creating space for all community members, it's disheartening. No neutrality. They're stuck.
Yeah.
They're just, I don't know anymore. We have Google,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, maybe next question. How do you think the city of Mason, along with the residents, would actually benefit if your proposal was adopted? If there was an actual Malcolm X Day of Observation, following, at least the same spirit of what we just heard before we started this interview, that the state has recognized it and is providing that kind of an honor designation for Malcolm X Day, right? So how do you think that would benefit the community of Mason?
Well, I think as far as you look up compelling stories, I think Malcolm's would be a strong, compelling story, right? We have a child who is super happy, his life was going great. His dad was a well-known minister. He would travel. His mom was leading her civil group, amazing structure, educated, bought land, bought property, right? Doing all the things for this American dream. Murdered, family dismantled, child of trauma. Let's separate everybody. Let's put them in white communities, while those communities are dealing with their own identities. And holy cow. And then so he goes through the anger, and he learns things. He becomes radicalized. He travels to Mecca. He figures it all out. He comes back and he still uses his platform to share about peace and love and the humanity in that and the humility of that. And I am someone who has gone through some major things, and I see the love and the beauty of Malcolm's story and how inspiring that is. And in context with, Mason and our community, we really have a lot to be inspired from his story for ourselves and what our role was, what's our reckoning, where are we trying to go, what are we doing? No point holding back waves now, but let's name the high school after him. Let's really have a reminder, a beacon, where we don't want to go and our place in it, it starts with these courageous conversations, it starts with acknowledgement, and it starts with having a vision of where you want to be. This is where community members want to be.
So do you think that the fact that they did not want to do this is more of a reflection, maybe is not so much centered around the person of Malcolm X, as amazing international figure that he is, but it has more to do with the fact that they don't want to have to do some, kind of internal reflection and investigation of their own history of racism and discrimination and prejudice that has existed and still continues to this day.
Yeah, the dynamic between progress and being stuck, it's reality, right? The reality is, by all sense, all information, all data, parents showing up about their kids' mental health, wanting trans kids to be safe in our schools, all the things, the community is telling us, but our board feels the desire to hold on to what they believe the tradition is, or it's so oppressive that there's no room for growth, there's no room to create space. I know the community, I'm very firm, or I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have gotten this far, and my platform wouldn't have grown, people wouldn't be as supportive, I think they're just kind of done. But unfortunately, when you have council members who also aren't on social media, so they don't even see the conversations, they say, you have to come here and tell us what you want, but yet are rude to those people and roll their eyes and sigh. You know, like, there is nothing we are doing by action currently that says we want you to come talk to us. Like, no. So like, the reality is, I think people are just getting fed up. You know, I've been consistent, and I think people are noticing that too. They're like, oh my gosh, Rita's like the only sane one. And I'm like, I know.
Well, that's maybe a good lead into my next and the last question I have, which was, because obviously, you know, there's been significant pushback. It takes a certain amount of commitment and courage to deal with the nonsense that you've had to deal with. So I'm just wondering how this whole experience has impacted you personally, and what it has taught you about the political process in general, and where do you think, you know, sort of it's leading us, right? Based upon your own personal experience around this issue.
I'll start with the negative. The toll on this has been my health. I've doubted myself. I've doubted my leadership. I low-key cry maybe 4 out of 7 days because I'm reminded of who my friends were or aren't, or that reality. I have to reevaluate my friendships and people. It's been isolating. But then on the other end, this totally raised my profile, and I know who my friends are, and I know who the supporters are. This validates my effectiveness as leadership. A U.S. Senator candidate has asked for my endorsement, right? I am also often asked your question, like, where is my strength? How do I keep doing this? And my mother's been aging and not feeling well, and she lives in her homeland of Hawaii. And I had to go home 3 times last year and just kind of look after situations and set things up for her. And I realized that my Asian American Pacific Islander culture has always been the part of me that makes me strong, because when you're playing with your little cousins and you're 7, and even though your younger cousins could be 5 or 3, and somebody does something wrong, like, that's on you. So you're always looking behind you, you're always making sure, does everybody have? And if not, then that's on you. And like, you're the one getting in trouble, you're the one that the elder's gonna talk to. So you're grown with this responsibility. And I realized that's gotta be a part of it. And then being raised where my father's side of the family was extremely comfortable with generational wealth, going home to visit my mom's family and seeing her turn, you know, the whitewashing and just the different culture things, and how do we fit in when we go back and visit, and how it would just kind of change every visit, and all this affects you, right, and makes you who you are. So does it suck when people are mad at you, blaming you for for wanting to speak up for others? It does. Do I know that they just don't know any better? Absolutely. And so I'm on a new mission, and we're gonna reset city council. I have 2 years left on my term. And yeah, so there are community members interested, and we're going to basically package everyone on council that they're the same guy, right? It's the same person. We need younger blood, we need more energy, and they need the funds, so I'm gonna start a super PAC and really get aggressive and have a whole team.
Oh, that is
Yeah,
wonderful.
so like, this isn't over, I'm not going anywhere, you know, and I encourage anybody listening that's afraid, don't be afraid. You know, you don't have to like all the things Rita says, but like, we all have to agree that we want inclusion and we need space created.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I appreciate your commitment, your testimony, your witness to the struggle, and